Hi, my name is Max, and I'm a happy member of Al-Anon. Paul always says I give the perverted version of his story, but I like to remind him that I was the one that was sober. Anyway, another little thing, I don't usually do this, but I think it's a good example. I don't know what you use, whether you use detachment or release with love. We use release with love. But there was a woman who went to a matinee of the Phantom of the Opera, and eventually another woman came in and sat down, and there was an empty seat between them, and they started to chat, and the second woman said to the first one, "Isn't it a shame that the seat is empty, or the seat between us is empty, and why couldn't you have given it to a friend or a relative or someone to use?" And the first woman said, "Well, that belonged to my husband." And she said, well, where is he?" She said, "He died." And I said, "Well, that's too bad, but like I said, couldn't you have asked a relative or a friend or someone to come?" And she said, "They're all at the funeral." I don't know why I like that. Anyway, I didn't know what the problem was. I thought Paul had lost his mind, really, is what I thought. And so I could just say that I have denial and stupidity and to sit down, because that's what it was. I mean, I really didn't know what was going on. I knew he had changed his personality, but anyway. And we used to drink for drink, and he won by an allergy. Anyway, I would always wait until about 11 o'clock at night to try to talk to him, and it always ended up the same way. He'd be mad, and I'd cry. And then I'd wait a couple days and think, well, I'll try again. And it was always the same thing over and over and over. And finally, I guess I turned off all my emotions, and I just didn't try to talk to him anymore. It took me a while because I used to talk until he would agree, and that didn't happen very often. and then I would, get mad or cry or whatever, and now I give him the right to be wrong. Anyway, then I decided that I would have some hobbies, because I didn't have any hobbies. All I did was work for Paul. And so any place I got 10 free lessons, I would take lessons. The first one was that I had bought an organ so that I would get 10 free lessons. And I never did learn to play that dumb thing. And it sat there until we moved, and then by that time it had needed some fixing up. But one of the reasons why I wouldn't do that is that my daughter played the piano very well, and I wasn't about to compete with her. Anyway, and then the next one I took painting lessons, and that I enjoyed, but some of my pictures were big and not that good either. I remember that this woman taught at her garage, and she had us paint these huge pictures. I remember the first one I got into was she had to paint an ocean scene, and my ocean was wild. I mean, it had big waves and everything, but I was so proud that it looked like an ocean that I took it down to the office and put it in there. And this one fellow had a lot of psychiatric help. And he looked at that picture and he said, "What were you angry about?" I said, "I wasn't angry." I don't know whether the rest of you Al-Anons can identify with that, but anyway, I guess I was pretty angry. And then when I tried to do things with Paul, he would use all 13 channels at once, watch television. Drove me nuts to just keep flipping the channel. Well, he still does that. I don't know why it would make any difference now. I just don't like to watch television with him. Before we came down here, we were in the motel, and he was doing the same thing. Now that's 30 years later after you came to the program. I don't know. Anyway, he's kind of obsessive. And then he would tell me things like we have to change all our friends and pour out the beer, and because I liked beer too. I was German. I was half German, and so I liked beer, and I rationalized with that. And so I wouldn't drink any beer as long as we didn't have it. And then he'd say, go to the store and get me 3 beers. And I was smart enough to figure this one out because I thought, I better get 4 or I won't get any. So anyway, that's what I did. And then we had a bar in our house, and he locked the bar and gave me the key. Well, that was a fun deal too. He was always asking me for the key, and I wouldn't give it back to him. And yet I thought all the time that I didn't know what his problem was. But I knew he drank too much. And he also took pills, which I took care of that later. But anyway, he had another doctor give him a case of scotch every Christmas. And then I'd let him have maybe 2 bottles, and the rest I would hide. And I would hide them in my closets and any place I could find a place. And I remember one time that I had an extra bottle, and I didn't know what to do with it. So I took it down to the office, and we had a cupboard that Paul never used. So I thought, well, that's a good place to put that. And so anyway, it was down low, and I put it in there. And I don't know when it was that I looked for that bottle, and it was gone. And I blamed the cleaning man. I didn't blame Paul, but I'm sure he's the one that got it, because he had a small pint, and then he had, the big one. And Paul wouldn't go to the psychiatrist, but he sent me. And I went. I guess it was to make me feel the one that I was crazy. I don't know. I've never learned that. But anyway, and I went 3.5 years. I went to different psychiatrists, but I still went to psychiatrists. I didn't learn anything from them, really. And they asked me that MMTI, which is about 660 questions, and the Rorschach test. You've probably heard of that. That's the Inkblot test. And he even had me try hypnosis. I can't imagine that I did all this stuff. But anyway, I did. And anything to please him. And then I went to a married couples retreat, and I went alone. And I went really to talk to the priest, and he agreed that he thought this was kind of strange, the way he was acting. We were trying to figure out what was going on. And I used to have to see how he was going to react so I'd know how to feel. God, when I think about this is pretty sick. I walked on eggs. And I used to think, I didn't get paid at my job with him. But I used to think, well, I'll get another job. But I never had the courage to go out and look for a job. Anyway, I was confused, depressed, and not interested. And other doctors tried to talk to me that were in our building. And they would tell me they felt that Paul had changed. And I agreed that that's all I'd say. And well, at that time, in the early 60s, they didn't know about alcoholism, really. And I was afraid to change, even if it's bad. At least it was predictable. And so, anyway, I had this sense of impending doom. And it was a psychologist I went to, and he decided I should go take Librium. I didn't know what that was. Anyway, I only took one a day, 110 milligram. I think that's the smallest dose you can take. And they disappeared, so I guess Paul took them. I don't know. Anyway, and I don't know where it was that he had his first convulsion. And I got very terrified, and because I'd never seen anyone have a convulsion before. And so anyway, I called the doctor in the next block, and he came over and decided that Paul should go in the hospital. And so I rode in the ambulance with him and got him all checked in, and he stayed till the next day, or just a couple days he stayed. And then he came home. I went there one Sunday, and he was in the room, and he was all dressed, and he had his, what do you call that thing that what? Intravenous. And I suppose it was something he was supposed to get. I don't know. But anyway, he was dressed with the tube coming out of the bottom of his pants. And he came home. And I wasn't very happy that he was, because he was so crappy. But anyway, so then he went to this neurologist, and he told him it was a marital problem. And I couldn't understand how I could cause him to have all these funny things. And I couldn't see that I could cause him to have a convulsion. And so anyway, but if he said it, it had to be true. I believed everything he said. Now, I don't know who was crazier, me or him. And in Al-Anon, I've learned because somebody says something doesn't necessarily make it true. And at least I have some confidence in my judgment. And I think he was pretty crazy myself. But anyway. And then the second convulsion he had 14 months later, we had a house with a long hall, and I heard this noise back in the bedroom, and I went back to see what was going on, and Paul was on the floor having a convulsion. And that time, my reaction was very different. I sat on the bed and waited for him to finish. And when he did, I said, "You've had a convulsion, you better go to bed." And I hadn't even been to Al-Anon yet. And then I guess Paul went to a neurologist after that. And he said he had a brain tumor. Or at least Paul said he had a brain tumor. So he went back to the Mayo Clinic, and it was in December, which was not the best time in the world to go back to Minnesota. And another thing that happened, there was a 35-year-old doctor who died and of an overdose, a drug overdose. And then if Paul died, I'd be out of a job, of course. But anyway, this doctor, I don't know. I think he was worse than Paul. But I know that our priest told us that he was 35 and he looked like a 65-year-old. And he was so beaten up in that. And anyway, so then he went back to the Mayo Clinic, and that didn't work out, and he signed out. He tried to get me to agree, and I wouldn't do that, but he had to sign himself out for the Mayo Clinic, and then I went to see the neurosurgeon in the nut ward and told him, for the first time I was honest, I told him about the pills he was taking, not about the booze, though, because I didn't think that was it. But anyway, after this young doctor died, I thought, well, I better do something about this, or he's going to be dead. And he promised me he wouldn't drink, and he got home and drank, and it was my fault. And I argued with him, and then he went into the the nut ward. He went into at home, and he used to make lists of things for me to do to keep the world running while he was locked up in the nut ward. And I would do it, or try to do it. And so anyway, one Saturday night I went over there to see him, and this fellow came in to take him to AA meetings. And I thought, why are they taking him to an AA meeting? They don't take crazy people there, do they? Or do they? You know. Anyway, and then this, on the way down, it was about 35 miles, I guess, down to Laguna. He took us down there, and he was talking about his ex-wife, that he had gotten her, I guess she wanted to leave, and he had gotten her guitar lessons for Christmas, and she took the guitar lessons, and then she decided to marry him, and he was devastated. And he also came to my Al-Anon meeting, which I wasn't happy about, because I thought he'll run right back and tell Paul anything I say. Of course, I didn't talk for a year, but anyway, and then while he was there, he had bought thousands of pills, and I didn't know what they were. I just dumped them down the garbage disposal because I didn't want anything to do with those pills. And then when the psychiatrist, he was very pro-AA at Al-Anon, and when he told me that I should go to Al-Anon, I told him that I didn't like women's clubs, and it was just positive thinking, and it worked maybe, but I didn't want to waste my time. Afraid to be happy. So I didn't go to Al-Anon really, well, for 10 minutes after that. I went to 3 meetings because this one gal took me, and I didn't like her either. So, so anyway, I quit, but I continued to go to AA meetings with Paul, and I enjoyed them. I guess I enjoyed them because I didn't have to do anything, and in Al-Anon I did. I did have to do something, and so, but I remember the stories that they told, and some things I identified with, some I didn't. There was one that I remember where this gal got up and said she always wanted to be a hooker, and I turned to Paul and I said, "What's a hooker?" I mean, I had no idea, and he told me. Anyway, and then what, you know, everything in the room, there was laughter and enthusiasm, and we sat at the door and left at the prayer, and on the way home, we didn't think anybody was very friendly. Of course, we didn't talk to anybody either, but that didn't count. And we communicated driving back and forth to the meetings, and we talked about what the speaker had said and that sort of thing, but nothing personal, because that was a rough spot. And instead of fighting, we'd talk about what the speaker had said, and then one time I don't know, it was the first couple years, I think, he hurt my feelings, and I cried and cried and cried, and then by 6 o'clock that night I couldn't remember what he said. So I couldn't be mad anymore, but anyway. But it took a while. It took quite a while for us. And then he would decide he wasn't going to go to the meetings anymore, the AA meetings. And so I would get dressed and go, even though I was afraid to drive on the freeway. And it took about 45 minutes to get down there. But that was the only thing I enjoyed. We didn't do anything. So I at least wanted to keep up with the AA meetings. And anyway, and it was more comfortable than trying to solve his problems. So I don't know how many times I went, not more than a couple times, and I guess he found that he didn't have anything to do when I was gone. I don't know. So he decided to come back to the meetings, and I was afraid but fascinated. And then I went to the Southern California Convention in Anaheim Convention Center, and I was sitting there all alone, and one of the gals who'd ridden in the car when I went to those 3 meetings asked me to come and sit with them. And I really felt more comfortable because rather than just sitting there alone. And then first year I would pass. I would say, my name is Maxine, and I pass. And I used to go in and try to find a seat where nobody would notice me. Well, it would, it always started there at the meeting, because it was a big meeting. I think we have 100 people coming to that meeting. And I would sit there and think of what I could say, or else somebody else would say what I was going to say, so then I had nothing to say. And when I did anything with Paul, he'd say, "Don't give me that Al-Anon crap. This is for real." So he wasn't real happy to see what was happening to me, I guess. And then now he comes with me all the time, and I don't care what he says. I can still say what I want to say. It only took me, I've been on Al-Anon over 30 years too, so it took me a long time. So if any of you get discouraged, just remember that I didn't get better overnight, I'll tell you. And I found out that I can be happy regardless of what anyone else says or doing, and I can't afford to get involved in somebody else's problems, and I have the freedom to be me, not what I think others want me to be. And it took 3 years before I knew how I felt. If anybody had asked me, I wouldn't have been able to tell them. I didn't know how I felt. And my first reaction was usually my true feeling. And Al-Anon helped in all areas of my life. And one time I had a problem with my younger daughter. She went away to school, and then she came back, and she was kind of belligerent. I guess it was because we wouldn't let her stay during the summer up in Washington, and we told her that she had to come back home. And I started sharing with her. I mean, I'd heard that at meetings, you share with your kids. And I'll tell you, it works better than when you're telling them. And so I was telling her how I felt about Paul and how I felt about her older sister. And I don't know, I must have talked an hour. And she didn't say anything to me. But she told a girlfriend of hers that Mom and I had the nicest talk. And I thought, I was the only one who talked, but it worked. And I've had a different relationship with her ever since. I formerly did the same things over and expected different results. And I've also heard at Al-Anon that acceptance is not approval. You don't have to accept something to approve of it. Sometimes you can't help it. I mean, this is what's happening, and you might as well accept it. At least I've heard that. And another thing that I learned was I asked myself 3 questions. Is it important? Is it any of my business? And what can I do about it? Usually it's nothing. And when you go through that routine, you realize how useless it is to do that. And I think, too, that humor is important. In fact, Paul and I were laughing. He has a hearing problem. I didn't think I did, but everything he said, I'd say, what? And I'd talk, he'd say, what? And we started to laugh because it was so silly. And also another thing we do is when we're having problems is we draw a line. And we decide we'll start over. And that works, too, sometimes. And I feel I'm responsible for what I do, not what others do. And I keep expectations low and verbalize the ones I have. I'm not a mind reader. It doesn't matter who's at fault. Live in the answer, not the problem. And today, I'm glad that Paul's an alcoholic so we could find this way of life, because our life is very different. Well, it was okay in the beginning, but the longer we went on, the worse it got. And anyway, Al-Anon and AA is a whole different way of living. And I guess you all know that if you've been around any time. Thank you.